if you're new to our little online community, what we like to do is take our messages or our little talks, and we like to clump them together and put them in a series. Kind of like how when you watch a TV show, there's all these episodes in one series. Well, that's what we like to do with our messages. And every time, the messages will have some kind of overarching theme that kind of, like ties them all together. And if you're new, you picked a great week to start watching, because today we are kicking off a brand new series. And here's why I'm excited about this series. Right now, I know that there are some people that are listening that are like, they've been doing this whole church thing for like decades, forever. From the time that they were like yay high to like, they went to all the schools, the camps, the programs, the groups, the everything. And they know it all. They got all the Christian t-shirts. They know all the Bible verses backwards and forwards. And if that's you, I think that you will find this series really helpful. But there's also a group that would probably consider themselves, this might be you, like in the beginning portion of your faith journey, right? Maybe you're just kind of checking things out. Maybe you're not totally sure. Maybe someone passed this along to you and they were like, hey, you should listen to this. Or maybe you were gone for a little while and then you came back. You're like, all right, let me give this another shot, see how it goes. Or maybe you're like, I kind of want some spirituality in my life. I'm not totally sure if the church is the route that I want to take, but you've been tracking with us for a few weeks. And if that's you, like you're just kind of putting your toe in the water, like kicking the tires, checking it out. If that's you, that's awesome, right? You should keep asking your questions, keep tracking with us. I think that's great. But for you, I think you also might find this really helpful. Then there's the last group. Now, this is the group that is the fun group. No. Yeah, all the groups are fun. This group's just special. All the groups are special. This is just the third group. So the third group, these are the people that are like, no, right? Not buying it, not into it, not going to convince me, not my thing, never was my thing, probably won't be my thing, right? And that might be you. And if that's you, like maybe, someone's twisting your arm, maybe like your girlfriend's making you watch this, or your parents are making you watch it, or your kids are making you watch it. Or maybe you're like sitting there and you're eating breakfast and your parents have this on in the background and you're like, I'm going to finish this and in 5 minutes I'm going to be right back in my room playing video games. And if that's you, well, I can relate to that. But also, I think if you'll stick around, I think that you might find this series helpful as well, or at the very least, you'll have something to think about. So to kind of like frame this whole thing, I'll tell you a little story. When I was in college, my first semester as a college student, my first semester as a freshman, I went to this little school in Pennsylvania. I went there for one semester. I actually went there to play basketball. And then when I got there, I realized I wasn't very good. So I left, and I just played intramurals at another school. But when I was there, I had this little introductory class. And in that class, we had these little breakout, like small groups. And in my group, there was this girl. And she had a story that I'll never forget. In fact, it wasn't like one story. It was a ton of stories of difficulty and struggle and hardship. Every time she would tell a story, it was like it would like bring tears to my eyes. It seemed like every time she would like top the negativity of the story before. And even during that season of life as a student, she was going through a serious season of struggle. She was from the inner city. She struggled with things like poverty, with loss, with uncertainty, just really tough stuff. And in every one of the stories, the hero of the story, according to her, was God. In every single one of them. It was like, well, we didn't know what was going to happen, but then God made this happen. Or, well, it was looking really dark and I had no idea, but then God did this. Or like, and it was time, over and over again. Like God was the hero of the story constantly. And if I'm being honest with you, there are times where I'm like, okay, is she like delusional? Has she just convinced herself? Like, has she brainwashed herself into thinking that God is the reason why all these things ended up working out. And I'm like throwing like all these possibilities in my head. If I'm being honest, like at that point in my life, I was still like trying to figure things out, not totally 100% sure if I was completely bought in to this whole thing. And every story, God was the hero of the story. Right now, Allie and I are watching this documentary on ESPN. It's called The Last Dance. It's about Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. Actually, it's really just about Michael Jordan. They throw in the Bulls every once in a while. But it's about his last season on the Bulls. And Allie's so excited about it. Like every week, she's counting down the days. She's like, 3 days till Sunday, 2 days till Sunday. What? Just kidding. She hates it, but she's a good sport. She's biting the bullet, so we watch it. Sunday nights. It's on tonight if you're watching this or listening to this on Sunday. But what they do is they give you some like background of the Bulls. And what you find out is that before they drafted Michael Jordan, the Bulls stunk. They did nothing good. They did nothing right. They won no championships. They had bad players, bad coaches, bad management, bad everything. But then Michael Jordan showed up. And then everything changed. Players got better. They brought in better players, brought in better coaches. The things changed in the front office. Their strategy changed. When they were playing in the games, and everybody knows it, anybody who's ever watched Michael Jordan knows, like, when the game was on the line, what would they do? They'd get the ball to Michael. They'd put it in his hands, literally put the ball in his hands, and every time he'd come through for them, he'd deliver over and over and over and over again. And if you look at the story of the Chicago Bulls, what you cannot deny was that Michael Jordan's presence on that team made a difference. It changed everything. And that's what I'm hearing from this girl as she's telling me this. She's like, well, God did this and God did that. And according to her, the fact that she had a relationship with God changed everything. That's what made the difference. And to her, it was undeniable. And here's the thing about her whole story. Throughout this entire thing, in every single story, she is confident that God is going to come through for her. Even in the situation we were currently in where she didn't know what was going to happen next, she would just be like, well, I think it'll be fine. God has taken us through it before. He'll take me through it again, over and over and over again. And she had this source of joy that just seemed to like ride above the ups and downs. She had this source of peace, like calm, that just just flooded all of her circumstances. And like I said, I would listen to her stories and I'd wonder, okay, is she delusional? Is she brainwashed? Is this all she has to hold on to? Or is there something real that's giving her this joy, that's giving her this hope, that's giving her this peace? Because if there's something that's real, then I want what she has. And the nagging question, like over and over and over again, the thing that like eventually started to frustrate me was, how do I get there? What do I do? Right? Is this about like me reading a certain amount of chapters in the Bible like every day? Is that how I'll get God to like show himself and like step into my circumstances so I can have that kind of like relationship with him? Do I have to like listen to a certain number of songs? Do I got to attend a certain church? Do I have to not miss church like so many weeks in a row? Like, how do I get there? How do I grow to be like that? Or maybe we would say, like, to put it in terms maybe you're more familiar with, especially if you've been in the church, what is growing? When we are growing spiritually. In order to make progress in terms of like God, if there's a God, if he's real, and we want to make progress to have what she has, what needs to grow? How do we get there? And so that's what this series is all about. That's why we're calling it Roots, right? It's this picture of growing deeper and of standing strong in the midst of all the craziness of not just like COVID-19 and all the uncertainty and craziness that this brings, but through every other situation in life. Like when it comes down to applying for colleges, choosing schools, finding someone you're going to marry, or maybe living through a diagnosis, or the uncertainty of the future of your loved ones or your kids, or no matter where you are going to be faced with the inevitable ups and downs of life. And we will stand stronger if we've grown roots. We'll be able to stand strong in the difficulties of life. So what is it that needs to grow when we're growing spiritually? Well, we're going to look at a passage today. And this passage, it's pretty insightful, is written by a guy named Paul. We talk about him a lot because he wrote a lot of the New Testament. And he, if you don't know who he is, he started a lot of churches. He came around like a little bit after Jesus, started a ton of churches, and then he liked to write them letters. Now, the letter to the church in Rome was a letter to a church that he had not met. He didn't start this church, and so it's a much longer letter because he's got a lot more to cover because these people aren't familiar with his teaching. And in the very beginning of the letter, he kind of explains how the whole thing works in kind of like a summary statement, kind of like both introducing and summarizing a lot of what he's going to teach. Now, the verse is a little bit clunky, right? It's a little bit like, it's not super smooth, but if you stick with me for a second, I think you'll see this will say something pretty powerful as it pertains to how we grow spiritually. Okay, here's what he says. He says, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel. For I am not ashamed of the gospel." Now, when we say gospel, we talk about this on Easter Sunday. I'm not going to go into the details, but basically the short version of the gospel is that on the cross, Jesus proved that he is the most loving being in all of existence, okay? On Easter Sunday, when he rose from the dead, he proved that he's also the most powerful being in all of existence. And when the most loving person or loving being proves themselves to also be the most powerful being in all of existence, those two things together, that's a good thing. We call that good news. The word gospel literally means good news, okay? So he says, I'm not ashamed of this news. I'm not going to hesitate to tell people it's good news, right? He says, because it is the power or the ability of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Now, something about me might help you understand me. Maybe you picked up on this a little bit if you've been around here for a little while. I try really hard not to use church words. I try to talk the same way from the front when I'm speaking to people in a church or online in a church service. I try to speak the same way as I do there as I would on the basketball court or at the gym or at the coffee shop or wherever else I go, right? And the reason why is because both Jesus and the people that followed him and the people that wrote the New Testament used non-spiritual words to explain spiritual things. To kind of make a long story way short, what happened was that over the course of hundreds of years, those terms that we have in the New Testament letters have become words that we only use in those New Testament letters and are only used in the context of church or religious settings. And so they've become like church and religious words. It's put together like this language that only people on the inside know. And what happens then is now there's this unnecessary barrier between those on the outside and those on the inside. And not just that, but those on the inside often don't understand the implications behind those words because they're words that we've just gotten used to hearing, right? So we know how and when to use them, but often we don't understand exactly what they mean. And I think a really good example of this is the word here translated salvation. Salvation. The power of, in the phrase, the power of God that brings salvation. The word salvation, it means, simply put, it means to rescue or to deliver or to intercede on behalf of someone. What you could say is that girl that I mentioned earlier, what she was experiencing over and over and over and over again was the power, the ability of God that brought salvation. Now, typically when you hear that word salvation in like a church setting, typically what most people mean when they say it in a church setting is heaven, right? And so is that true? Yes, it's true. Like what he's saying here, yes, it's part of it. It's part of it. Like those who believe will go to heaven. That's part of his point. But it's so much more than that. It's so much more than that. He's saying what's happening here is the people who believe are the people who will see God stepping in to rescue, to intervene over and over and over and over again. The word there, to believe, or who believes, it's the same word for the word faith. It goes on and he says that this way of life, this, like, when he uses the word like righteousness, it's by faith, right? From first to last. That term, like where it says first to last, the original language just says by faith to faith, faith to faith. And so there's been a lot of argument about how do you translate that? Do you literally translate it faith to faith, or does he mean like from first to last? Does he mean it's a process? What is he trying to say? I don't know. But what I do know is that it comes down to faith. In other words, here's what I'm getting at here, okay? And I think this is what Paul's getting at. Like the part of us that needs to grow, if we want to grow spiritually, is faith. Faith is the difference maker. In fact, there's another letter in the New Testament, we call it Hebrews. And what the writer of Hebrews says, he basically says in the 4th chapter, if you want to look it up, it's in verse 2. He says, we've heard a message and they've heard a message, but the message that they've heard, this gospel message, the good news, it meant nothing to them. It was of zero value to them because it wasn't combined with faith. So meaning like you could go your whole life, you could sit in church every single day, know the story backwards and forwards, know all the main characters, all the fancy Greek words, everything, right? But if it's not something that's combined with faith, it will mean absolutely nothing for you. It will make no difference. And if I'm being honest, like when I'm listening to her stories that she's telling me, I'm listening and I'm like, yeah, like my experience, like there are days when I'm feeling like doing the Christian thing, days when I'm not, and some days I will, some days I won't. And if I'm being honest, like the difference between those days aren't really like too dramatic, right? It's not like some days I see God in such a powerful way and some days I don't. And what Paul's saying is, well, what it comes down to is faith. Now, again, faith is one of those terms we're like super used to hearing. We apply it in all sorts of different ways, right? You might say you're a person of faith, which basically what you're trying to say when you say that is you're a person who, maybe considers themselves a Christian, right? Or you might say that you know of a faith-based organization. What you mean is that that's a Christian organization. So we've taken the word faith and we've applied it in all different contexts, right? But really, the word, it just means believe. It means believe, it means trust, or we could say it means to have confidence in. So, to grow spiritually, to make progress, to see God moving in our lives, like doing things in our lives, we need to grow in confidence. Confidence in God. Confidence that God is who he says he is, and that he'll do what he says he'll do. Your best relationships are built on that same confidence, or what we would call trust, right? Your strongest relationships, if you're married and you have a strong marriage, it's a marriage that I promise you is built on trust. If you want to sabotage your marriage, break that trust. It'll break the relationship, right? Because that is a super, super strong thing. And what Paul's saying here is that what's at the heart of our relationship with God, what everything comes from, everything in this spiritual, in terms of Christianity and living all this out, it all comes back to whether or not we trust God. In fact, that's the whole story. That's the whole story. If you rewind all the way back to page 1 of the Bible, of how Christians believe the whole world started. It's a story of a guy saying, you know what? I don't think I trust that God is in this for me. I don't think I trust that he has my best in mind. So I'm going to go do my own thing. And he does. And really bad stuff happens. And then, for the rest of human history, right? All of the writings in the New Testament and the Old Testament, the whole thing, it's God saying, you can trust me. You can trust me. We see it, if you know the story of Moses, when he took the whole Exodus story, right? When he rescued the Jews out of Egypt. And then there's the whole scene with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, if you're familiar with those, they open up and God says, I am the God who rescued you out of Egypt, right? Basically what he's saying is, in case you forgot, before you hear what I'm going to tell you, you remember that you can trust me, that I am in this for you. In the New Testament, when we see Jesus walking around, we only see Jesus amazed a few times. Only amazed a few times. And the only thing that amazes him is faith. He is amazed at one point at how little faith people have. Like people who have seen so much of him and still have such little faith. And then he's amazed at somebody else who has this huge faith, like crazy faith. And he's shocked. He's shocked because of the extent that this guy trusts him. And so what the central message of all of this is that it's faith. Like it starts with, it flows out of what we believe about God. And so, what do we do to increase our confidence in God? Do we have to get to church a certain amount of times every week? Have to listen to a number of Christian songs? Maybe the warm air will hit you in the car just when the song hits the bridge, and then you'll get the warm fuzzies, right? And maybe that will increase your faith. How do we get there? How do we increase our confidence in God? Well, there's a church in Atlanta, Georgia. It's run by a pastor. His name's Andy Stanley. And he has what they call the 5 faith catalysts. And this came from an experiment that they did several times. In fact, we did it this week with the people that follow us on social media and got the same exact results. Basically what he does is he takes a bunch of people that say that they have faith, like people that consider themselves followers of Jesus or Christians, and he says, tell me your story. Tell me the things that made your faith grow. And every single thing that is mentioned in these stories is something that fits into at least one of the 5 faith catalysts. And we did the same thing this week, right? On our Instagram, I think we wrote, share one thing that has caused your faith to grow. And every single one of those things falls into one of those 5 categories. Now, these aren't things this list is not a list that's in the Bible. The things are in the Bible. It's supported by everything that's in the Bible. But this list is something that's man-made. But what I think you'll see is that as we go through each one of these things, these are things that you can, if you choose to, incorporate into your life. And if you choose to apply them, if you look for these catalysts, if you look for ways to weave these things into your daily routine, what I think you'll see is that your faith will start to develop roots. Think about it. Think about it. What would your life look like if you had, whether you believe it or not, maybe you don't believe in God right now, but just imagine, play this game with me, right? Imagine there is a God who loves you, who's real, who is good, right? What would your life look like if you had complete confidence in him all the time? What would your life look like when you heard bad news? What would your life look like when you got a diagnosis? What would your life look like when you had to deal with the issue of death? What would your life look like when you had to deal with a global pandemic? What would your life look like in the ups and downs? What would your priorities look like? Think about the kind of life you could live. Think about the joy you could have. Think about the internal peace you can have if you had complete confidence that there is a God who loves you enough to give his life for you and is powerful enough to take it back from the dead. So here's your homework for this week. Two things. First one, I want you, if you're somebody who's been in the church for a long time, I want you to think, is my relationship with God an element of my life? Is his presence in my life something that has made a difference that is undeniable? Undeniable. Does that actually change the way that I live? The second thing I want you to do, and this is for people that are either new to this, especially for people who are new to this, or if you're not sold on it at all, but maybe you'll listen next week, okay? Here's your homework. When you face bad news this week, or when you face good news, or when you face any fork in the road where you have to make a decision, what I want you to think about is, how would a person of great faith, a person with unshakable faith, a person with deep roots, how would they respond to this news? Think about it. Chew on that. And then meet us back here for part 2 of our series. But until then, have a great week.